think we can safely say that as the season opener, the 2025 Australian GP did not disappoint, unless of course you are a rookie or a Ferrari fan. But if you fall into the latter category, you're probably used to being let down by now. In this video, we are gonna look at where certain team strategies went sideways and how that benefited others. And of course, I'll answer the question that I know is at least subconsciously on everyone's mind. Could have it been possible to hear the glorious pairing of the Dutch-Austrian national anthems at the end of the race? To analyze all of this, we first need to look at my favorite strategy chart. Now, in terms of the first pit stop, you can see that almost everyone made the unanimous decision to pit after 33 or 34 laps, well, except for Haas, and don't ask me what the logic behind that was. Up until this point, teams were waiting for the right moment to switch to slicks, and the Alonso incident provided just that. The top contenders at the time closing with Leclerc had already passed the pit entry when the safety car was deployed, forcing them to wait an extra lap to change tires, while the drivers behind them pitted immediately. This didn't affect power dynamics though, given that the safety car continued for many more laps. Now, what I find unfortunate is that we didn't get to see how the different slick compound choices would have played out. There were only 2 relevant laps between Alonso's and Piastri's incidents where drivers were allowed to race. And trust me, those on the medium tire could have gained a not so insignificant advantage. After Piastri's slip, there were some that pitted immediately and others who threw their chances away completely. Now, you might be surprised, but pitting right away after lap 44, which is something that Norris, Russell, Albon, and the rest of the gang followed, was not the absolute best decision. And I'm going to prove that by breaking down the Verstappen versus Norris situation. Just to clarify, during their first stints, Verstappen did not stand a chance. At no point before the first tire change was he faster than Norris, or even Piastri for that matter. While McLaren's tire management is undeniably superior right now, I wouldn't attribute this gap to tire degradation alone. The Red Bull was simply much slower under these conditions. Now, here's where I believe Verstappen had a tight but very real chance to win the race. Piastri's slip happened pretty shortly after the previous safety car ended, which naturally brought the grid together. Therefore, pitting on lap 44 meant losing a considerable number of positions, but of course, loads of drivers opted for that. As I mentioned, Norris pitted immediately while Verstappen stayed out. By the time Norris exited the pits on lap 45, Verstappen had a 22-second lead. And as a little bonus, guess who was ahead of Norris on track? Liam Lawson. The key thing to highlight here is that during Norris's pit stop, the yellow flag was lifted, allowing those still on track to build a slight gap before Bortoletos triggered another safety car. If Verstappen had pitted just 1 lap after Norris with that 21 to 22 second advantage, he might have rejoined ahead of the Brit. Not saying that this would have happened 100%, but yeah, the chance was there. And given Verstappen's pace in his final stint, which was faster than Norris's, he could have held onto that lead. Instead, Red Bull decided to pit him 2 laps after Norris, by which point Lando had already closed the gap to 15 seconds, and so that's where Max's chances jumped out of the window. As such, the ideal time to pit was not after 44, but after 45 laps. Alas, no one chose that option. And you see, here is where Ferrari decided to double down on their weird strategy and keep both of their drivers out for an additional lap compared to Max. When you guessed it, the grid was very much together again. So both Leclerc and Hamilton ended up losing a ton of positions, much like Tsunoda and Gasly. If you remember, Hamilton was stuck behind Albon for a good chunk of the race, but had he pitted on the magic 46th lap that I mentioned, he would have perfected the craft of an undercut and could have very much threatened even Russell's position. Now, all the strategical weirdness in Leclerc's "I don't give a flying poopy" about potentially butting into my teammate upon overtaking us side, Ferrari was just slow. I'm sorry, but you can see it in the data. Mercedes and Verstappen were faster throughout the entire race. Although I'm here to analyze data and not politics, I cannot brush over the fact that McLaren made one questionable call. I'm sure most of you remember how Piastri was in Norris's DRS during the first intermediate stint and how the team asked him to hold position when the Australian driver on the Australian Grand Prix said that he was faster. Well, Here's a chart. Charts don't lie. He was indeed faster. I get that overtaking is a different challenge, but waiting until he was 3 seconds behind Norris to finally say, oh well, now you're free to race, seems a bit sketchy to me. Before wrapping up, I want to take a moment to grieve Tsunoda and Gasly's races. They did nothing wrong, could have easily bagged a bunch of points, but replicating the Ferrari strategy was their undoing. Unlucky for them, but a golden opportunity for Albon, Hulkenberg, and of all people, Lance Stroll. Oh, and yeah, what about Antonelli, you ask? I mean, the fella gained 12 positions. How did he do that? Well, of course, he didn't qualify that well, so Hadjar, Sainz, Alonso, and Bortoleto not finishing the race elevated his position. Piastri's fall further helped him, and credit where it's due, Mercedes made all the right strategy calls for both of their drivers. Plus, his overtakes on Hulkenberg, Stroll, and Albon were the cherry on top. But as always, tell me your thoughts in the comments below. How would you rate this race? And what are your expectations for the Chinese GP? Take care and see you soon.